So Brian's back with me, and together we're going to walk through what to expect in Module 1 of the Life After Pornography program. And I hope that this conversation will be helpful for those who have already gone through the Life After Pornography program, are currently going through it, or interested in learning more about how principles from acceptance and commitment therapy could be helpful for them. I'm really excited to learn from Brian's insights and experiences as someone who's gone through the program, and also to have an opportunity to share some of my thoughts about these principles and how I've seen them to be really helpful for people over the years in overcoming their struggle with pornography. If you're like me, you know your mind can be your best or your worst friend. Our mind is an amazing tool that can do incredible things, but our mind can also create problems out of nowhere. Sometimes our mind keeps recommending the same solutions to problems even when they aren't working. I see this pattern play out as individuals try to overcome their anxiety, depression, or even struggles with pornography, using approaches that make sense but aren't very helpful. This podcast will show you how real researchers and clinicians are changing the way we approach mental health and reveal helpful research-supported principles designed to help real people with real problems. My name is Dr. Cameron Staley, and welcome to the Life After Series Radio. So I'm back with Brian again, and we've had a lot of podcasts covering a lot of different topics, and we thought it might be a good idea to actually spend some time walking through the actual Life After Pornography program. So we have it set up where there's 10 modules. Each module covers a lot of different topics, and there's a corresponding workbook that allows you to kind of reflect on the concepts and apply them in your life. Each module has a mindfulness exercise as well to kind of get you in the mindset to be open to some of these concepts that our mind might initially kind of struggle with or reject. And we thought it might be helpful to, start with Module 1. So for people that are going through the Life After Pornography program, hopefully this will be helpful to get some different perspectives. For people that have never gone through Life After Pornography, this will be kind of a walkthrough about what it looks like and kind of what to expect. So I put these together, but Brian actually went through them. And so we'll be offering different perspectives about this. So I'm really curious your thoughts on this, because I think about this as the counselor and concepts I'm hoping to convey and ones that I think might be helpful. But I think the perspective you have is going to be unique as well, where it's like, hey, I'm coming here for a specific kind of struggle or concern, and this is how I applied them. And maybe there's some overlap there, but there's probably some unique differences in how we both experience some of these concepts in these modules.
I'm very excited too. And I think these podcasts have all been validating of bringing two individuals' perspective on concepts together and what you can come up with in tandem. And so I'm excited too. And I'm just excited to go back through them and be able to pick up more things another time. I think there's a certain amount of education that comes from seeing something over again at a foundational level and then building on that. So I'm excited.
Oh, absolutely. And I would agree. Like, I really put these modules together just based on walking through these same principles with hundreds of people. And every time I've done it, I've learned a little bit something new and learned from people going through it. And then putting together the modules, I kept learning. And so I don't view myself as a finished product where it's like, I will teach you my wisdom from the mountaintop. It's like, no, every time I've gone through these concepts, they've impacted me differently because I'm always different. And so I do enjoy this journey going back through and reflecting. And I think, there's a lot of value in reviewing these ideas because I think we're always changing. It's a very dynamic process.
It's cool just to articulate that. Like, the material doesn't change, but because you're in a different circumstance, you're seeing changes. You're seeing different things from the material.
Yeah.
Which I love that. That's just one of the blessings of being a human and living life. You get to see things differently every day. So
I love that too. It's always fresh. It's always dynamic. And I think that's how you know a concept has some impact, that if you can review it and reread it, there's something there. And I think for me, I really enjoy reading ancient scripture, and I reread it and reread it because there's something there that deeply resonates with me. There's truth. Where there might be some news articles I might read once and I'll never read it again. Like there's nothing there. But sometimes there's some concepts that feel like big T truth that resonate with me. And acceptance and commitment therapy has resonated with me at that level, that building on mindfulness, I still feel like I'm scratching the surface about what mindfulness can allow us to really accomplish in this life. And I feel like in the Life After Pornography program, we're just getting an introduction to that.
Yeah, I strictly remember at first, my first time going through the program, how difficult mindfulness was. At least at first, because I felt really weird doing it. But quickly learned to appreciate it. And now, obviously, having been through it and looking at the structure of the course, you start each one of the modules with a mindfulness exercise. And I feel like that just sets the stage.
Yeah.
Now you're in this prepared environment to understand all this material and have it resonate with you and mindfully learn. And that was really cool. And I especially love the mindfulness exercise in module 1 because it talks about breath. And I think one of the quotes you have in there is like, let breath be your anchor to a mindful moment. And I thought that was cool because if you're not breathing, you're dead. Like that's facts, right? Like it's pretty unavoidable, like truth.
Yeah.
And so you can always, like, no matter what's going on, like you're going to breathe. Like it's a constant. And I hadn't really put that together before. And just like the ability to remember that you are still like a breathing human. Like there's a weird amount of power in that. Like the world can be in complete shambles, but like you're still breathing. Like you're living for you. That was just kind of it's like a soapbox moment of this mindfulness exercise. But I thought that was really cool and like really powerful to start off with that.
Oh, I love that. And I think, wow, there's so much to breathing. And the part that you highlighted is the part that resonates with me. And I didn't come up with that. I've heard that from other people leading mindfulness exercises. And I think it struck me because often my mind is thinking about things in the future and anticipating all these scenarios and outcomes, and then revisiting the past and, oh, I should have done that different. There's some regrets there. But breathing only exists in the present and in this moment. And so when I find myself getting overly anxious or caught up, that allows me to come back to this moment. Or when I start to feel sad about the past and regrets, breathing is the quickest way I've found to bring myself back to this present, into this moment. And for me, our mind, just through the product of language, we can entertain all these future realms and remember all these things from the past. And really, that is a product of language. But the future and the past doesn't exist. Like all we have is this moment. And the breath is a really, it's like a highway to get back to this moment. The only thing that's real, I think about all the connections, all the emotions, anything that's really purposeful and meaningful is occurring in this moment. And I think just getting back into our bodies and breathing, I often don't attend to that, but today, I've had a headache for a day and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just don't feel good. And I'm like, you tell people to breathe a lot when you're stressed and have a headache. Maybe you should do that. And I did. I sat here over lunch and I reclined and I just did some paced breathing. I was breathing in for 5 seconds, breathing out for 5 seconds. And that's a 6 breaths per minute cycle, which is a fairly common breathing rate that can be quite soothing, where we're kind of both activating our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. And it helps you find some what they call autonomic balance. It's very soothing. And I found after breathing for 20 minutes, my headache cleared up. And I was back there in that moment. And it really did. I think the feeling that I had is it feels good to be alive. It feels good to have a body and to have breath. And I think that is so commonplace, where we breathe on average 20,000 times a day, that we're not going to be like, oh, that breathing feels so good 20,000 times a day. We're not. And yet when we take that moment to really anchor ourselves in the present and appreciate what our body does so reflexively and automatically, but then to bring some intention and some appreciation, is so grounding. And for me, it's also restorative, where it changes that pH level in your blood and it actually allows oxygen to unbind from your red blood cells and get to your brain. And so your thought process is even clearer, and it's slower, and it's not scattered, and it's not racing. And it allows us to entertain new ideas and new perspectives. And I think it is so foundational, where often people that struggle with compulsive behaviors, their mind is telling them the same thing they need to do to fix it, and it hasn't worked, and your mind's still going to recommend the same thing. And the only way to do something different is to get in a mindset that you're open to a different possibility. And for me, mindfulness is one way to cultivate that openness, where we get out of our mental ruts, and now we're allowed to see each moment as if it's the first time we've ever come across it before. And that's the beginner mind that I think is so necessary. Instead of saying, oh, I've struggled with this for so long, I know what this is. It's like, no, each time it's new. What can we learn from this moment?
I love that. And how cool. I feel like I'm always taking like the holistic side to everything, and I feel so bad for our bodies. Like, our autonomic nervous system is the coolest thing ever. And then our emotions have to come in and just mess everything up, right? Like, we're over here trying to like breathe normally, have like a healthy heart rate. Like, our body's taking care of so much stuff. And then all of a sudden we're anxious, our heart rate shoots through the roof, our breathing speeds up, and we can't sleep. But that advice to like breathe, and like there is a breathing pattern that's like more soothing than a different breathing pattern.
Yeah.
And like that can literally put you in a state where you can now fall asleep. Like, mindfulness isn't just some like hippie granola idea. Like, it's a very healthy approach.
Yeah. Man, you stole the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to say that. My reaction, honestly, as a beginning psychologist, when people say, oh, I teach people breathing and relaxation and mindfulness, I'm like, that's some hippie stuff. Like, let me do some real work. And then I actually learned about biofeedback training, where you use sensors and you can look at people's heart rate and their nervous system activity and their sweat response and muscle tension and monitor breathing. And it wasn't until I could see the biological signals on screen where I became a believer in breathing. And it's like part of that, I'm like, yeah, let me do some cool stuff. And now it's like, whoa, I've seen how breathing is what tells your heart what to do. And that in turn tells your nervous system what to do. And that breathing rate is voluntary. And that in turn influences other involuntary systems. And it comes back down to something so simple as breathing. But for me, at the scientist, I need to see the data, like objectively show me how this impacts my body. And I've seen that enough doing biofeedback training, where it's not just some hippie foo-foo stuff. I've seen how it changes us at a nervous system level fairly rapidly. Not like, well, with years of practice, then maybe. It's like quickly. And for novice beginners where they've never done mindfulness, never attended to breathing, you can see changes in heart rhythms and nervous system rapidly. And it not only changes your physical state, but it changes your state of mind. And it's something as simple as the breath. And we got to do it anyway. Might as well breathe in a way that's going to be calming and helpful to us.
It's so powerful. It's so powerful. And there's so many cool tie-ins my all-time favorite movie, total plug, name drop, Warrior. I love that movie so much. It's like an MMA boxing movie. And there's just this really great coach who keeps telling his guy, like, breathe. And he's like in there getting his face punched. Like, don't tell me life gets more stressful than that. And your coach is over there telling you to, like, breathe. He's not telling you to like, hey, like, swing right, or like, he's telling you to breathe, like, calm down, like, get your foundation. Like, there's so much more power in that than just wildly swinging at life.
Yep. It's huge. No, I love those comparisons. And now I'm going to go off on that too, where I was chatting with a tennis coach, a collegiate level tennis coach. And he's like, do you know why tennis players are always fiddling with their strings in between serves? And I always thought, like, well, they're straightening it out so they can hit it better. And he said, it's a mindfulness practice. It's being able to focus on something, and it's quite grounding. And then I read about Novak Djokovic, one of the top tennis players on the planet. And he does a paced breath in between serves. And it's the same thing, elite golfers. Like, that sport requires autonomic balance. And the golfers that are able to calm their bodies are more effective. It's not like you need to be stronger. It's you need to calm yourself. And we've done this research with elite Olympic level athletes. It's not about how much you can amp yourself up for an event. It's actually how well you can regulate that after the event. And it's being able to keep those reserves so when you need them, they're there, but it's coming back down. And so our ability to calm our nervous system and our heart actually correlates with elite athletic performance. And I'm talking about like Olympic level performance. The best of the best learn how to calm their body through breathing. And I was watching the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, and I saw James Harrison. He was like almost 40 at this point, linebacker. And they showed him on the sidelines. And they're like, oh, look, this guy, he's so old and he's still in the game. How does he do it? And I watched, and he was doing paced breathing. He was slowing his breathing down. And I'm like, there's no accident that he's still an elite NFL player, almost 40. He's learned how his body works. And I read about LeBron James, and he says, I spend $1 million a year on my body. And it's like, what? What could you even do? But it's these types of things and learning these practices that are really as simple as fixing some strings on a racket, focusing on that, dribbling the ball a couple of times, and all that repetition. You think about NBA players, their free throws, they're the same every time. It's a mindfulness practice. That's what this is. It's grounding. And you notice they slow their breathing down at the free throw line. And that's what it's all about. And the players that get nervous, they miss a lot more because they're not attending to that dynamic. But so much of life and sport is about calming and settling our mind and our body. And breathing is the most direct, powerful way I've ever found to do that.
For fear of just going into an entire 3-hour-long conversation about like athletics and mindfulness, which I know we could do. I love the balance you're bringing up. And I know specifically for me, the realization that was really powerful and kind of the perspective switch was when I realized how much I needed to make mindfulness a habit and an attitude rather than just like once a month doing a formal mindfulness exercise, right? And it was so striking to me because I looked at, and this goes for anyone, if there's a certain skill or hobby you've put an immense amount of time into, and you see your progress over the years that you've been doing this, you understand how much time you would need to put into mindfulness.
Yeah.
And that was a cool, and granted, you can tap into those moments just after one mindfulness exercise. Like when you go to the gym for the first time and you feel that endorphin rush, and then you feel sore. Like those are all positive results. Well, some people don't like being sore, but the idea is the same. But it's, you see progress in strength and size build up over time. But there is a balance to that. There's spending time on your physical health and also on your mental health.
Yep.
And also education. And I love that mindfulness will actually, as a practice in itself, help your mental health, but it will also help your other aspects of living healthily. And if you struggle with your physical health, being mentally healthy will help you be more physically healthy.
Yep. No, I love that you bring in that holistic approach, because that's what it's all about. That's health. Yep. Well, I actually like that we're spending this much time with mindfulness, because often when I'm leading these ACT groups and I'm starting with mindfulness, and I got a group full of folks that have been struggling with porn, they're like, okay, why did we do that? How's that going to help me get rid of porn? And that's often what our mind does. It's like, no, let's skip that part. Now teach me how to not have porn. And it's like, no, this is actually the nutrition. This is the foundation. And it's like, okay, yeah, I got that part. Mindfulness, breathing, got it. Let's move on. And there isn't like a moving on. And so there are more concepts in acceptance and commitment therapy that build on this. But this really is the bedrock. And I even did a full day. I remember the first full day training I did for counselors on ACT for pornography. And we did a lot of mindfulness exercises and a lot of training on this attitude and how much it's infused. And I remember reading the feedback I got on that training. And they said, you didn't tell us how to get rid of porn. Like, this training wasn't even focused on pornography. It was all about mindfulness. And it's like, yeah, it sure was. You're right. We actually didn't talk much about pornography in this 8-hour training that was about how to overcome pornography. We really didn't spend a lot of time talking about it. And that's true when I work with people in counseling. I'm spending a lot more time cultivating the skill set and the attitude that's needed to live a better life. I'm not teaching a bunch of tricks about how to stop looking at porn. But getting that adequate nutrition actually allows people to let go of the porn coping strategy. But our mind's going to be like, no, tell me exactly how this fixes porn. And I'm not going to do that. Like, that's not really what it's about. We're going to teach you to be healthier, interact with your mind differently. And then your ability to manage arousal and emotions and urges is going to be dramatically improved. You're going to be okay. But we see in the research over and over and over that folks that struggle with porn have lower levels of trait mindfulness. They're less aware of their body, their emotions, their thinking. So if that's a major ingredient, we need to cultivate that mindset. And so I do really hope as people go through these modules, they don't be like, well, skipping that mindfulness, that's boring. Let's talk about the cool stuff. It's like, you're probably going to be disappointed with the cool stuff because it's only going to have an impact with that mindful approach or attitude.
I remember earlier on at some point in our conversations, you said, I wish there was a way to only let people unlock the next module if they've done X amount of mindfulness exercises. And my first thought was like, oh shoot, I probably wouldn't have made it very far. But then after, just do not underestimate the power of that mindfulness.
Yep.
And I love that you brought up that our mind, we just want the shovels, right? To use the vernacular from module 1, we're looking for those things that are logical solutions. We're looking for the filters and the busyness and the accountability buddies and the confession. We're looking for all that, but that's not going to be what helps. That's going to dig our hole deeper.
Yeah. And that's where Life After Pornography starts. That first module, it's called You're in a Hole. And for many people, the struggle with pornography probably feels like this really deep, dark pit. And you've tried everything you could think of to get out of this hole. And like you shared, many of those are probably like shovels. And they probably made the hole a lot deeper. And one thing I am thoughtful about in sharing that metaphor is I'm really trying to help people get a sense of where they are, and actually get in contact with this hole and this struggle and how aggravating it is and how lonely it is and how dark that it really can be. And often it's like, no, I've been in here so long, I don't want to spend any more time in this hole. Get me out of here as quickly as possible. And what I'm inviting people to do is maybe reflect a little bit more about what this struggle has really been like, and to connect with those emotions. And then to start to look at all these things you've tried to get out of this hole. What if they are actually the problem? And what if they are the very things that are keeping you stuck? All those things you've been told to do, all those things your mind brainstorms is going to help you get out of it. What if those are actually the problem? And I think that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with actually orienting to the actual problem, which many people think, well, the porn's the problem, clearly. And it's like, what if it's not? What if it's how your mind is trying to approach the problem? What if that is actually the problem? And I would say that's true for a lot of things. Like anxiety is one that I think about quite a bit. And Life After Anxiety will be the next program that we roll out. Is often anxiety is not the problem. It's how our mind attempts to control those anxious thoughts and emotions and physical sensations. That is what develops an anxiety problem. But our mind doesn't have like a self-check device. Its only job is to help you figure out problems and solve them, solve them, solve them. It's just not reflecting on, are my efforts helpful? And I think that's where I'm trying to encourage people to start is let's actually take a step back and reflect on, where are we? Number one, what does it feel like to be in this place? And all of the things we've been trying to do all these years, are they making it better or are they making it worse?
And it's so funny. Module 1 is like, it's so frustrating because like you hear it all and you know it's true and it like resonates so well, but you're like, oh, like my mind doesn't like any of this. Like,
yeah,
because I've been using pages full of shovels, and I literally wrote pages full of shovels of examples. But when you say that all of a sudden the problem's different, our mind, it's like hard to even accept that. It's like, no, I want to keep, like, let me keep shoveling. Like, I've got these calluses now. Like, I can do this. Like, and you're 7 miles underground, like thinking you're almost about to dig out the other side, right? Like, it makes no sense when you zoom out and look at it. But for some reason, that's what we do.
Yeah. That's what our mind is. And I think it's amazing to start to see our mind for what it is, instead of, well, I'm an addict and that's why I'm stuck in this hole and I'm the only one. There's nothing I can do about it. There's something pathological and fundamentally wrong with me. And instead, we're going to shift that mindset to, actually, this is all coming from the same problem-solving mind that we all have. That is universal. There's not something flawed or broken with you. It's, we need to learn how our mind works. And once we like get the rule book to our mind, it's like, oh, like it can be our best friend. It doesn't have to be our enemy. But often we're digging and digging because we don't really understand how our mind works and what it's really good at and what its limitations are. And that for me is the biggest thing I've learned through ACT, is it's not like these people are doing it wrong, that's why they have porn issues or anxiety issues or depression. It's more, we don't understand our mind very well. And it's in an effort to help us, it's caused problems. And if we can understand it better, it's going to cause less problems and actually can help us live a better life. And that for me isn't like, well, some people don't know how their mind works, but others do. That's universal. We all need to learn how to interact with our mind differently. And module 1 is the beginning to orient to learning about how your mind really works and to actually get the playbook.
Again, I'm just going back to this idea that it's like, it's so nice to finally hear it, but like it is hard to hear. And you associate, like, you never want to be in the wrong. obviously, but like I'm over here thinking like the only thing I associate with digging holes is like digging your own grave, and then like holes with Shia LaBeouf where he's like in like a child like penitentiary. It's like, do I really want to spend the rest of my life like shoveling, right? Like the whole point of life after pornography is that you do not need to.
Yeah.
Like you just put the shovel down.
Yeah.
And you understand how your mind works, and that's going to get you out of that hole.
Yep.
And then you don't ever have to shovel again if you don't want to. I mean, you can hop back in if you want, if you like it that much, but can't see why you would. But no, I'm not, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say that it was purely intentional starting off with this module 1 and the language and the way that it makes you feel, because it does do a very good job of initially you slow down, you breathe, and then you're ready to hear where you are at.
Yeah.
And I know how powerful that was for me. And it was powerful just hearing the person in a hole analogy, but then hearing the shovels. And now it's like, oh my gosh, everything I have done over the past decade has been this futile attempt at getting myself out of this and just digging myself deeper.
Yeah.
And it's a very humbling experience.
Yeah. I think that's well said. It's so helpful to hear that perspective, because I think it is quite humbling to take stock of all the things you've tried and how utterly ineffective they are. But I also want it to be somewhat validating too, where often people with a porn issue have felt like, I don't have enough self-control, I'm not disciplined enough, I need to work harder, I need to devote more time. And like the opposite's true. We're like, actually, you've been working way too hard in the wrong direction with this struggle. And it's not that you are not motivated or not disciplined enough or don't have enough self-control. Actually, that's probably you got too much of that. And this is evidence of it. Like, look how deep this hole is and all these years of digging. And so the ACT folks really talk about this concept of digging this hole and being able to see this for what it really is almost creates this sense of creative hopelessness, where it's like everything I've tried does not work. And there's a hopelessness where it's like, if I keep digging, it's not going to work. But there's also like this creative part where it's like, okay, well, if that doesn't work, I wonder what else might. And I think you nailed it. Like, we're so used to digging, like, give me another shovel, give me another filter, another accountability buddy, another trick, and I will do it. And so even if I gave you the answer, like if I could lower down a ladder right then in that hole, all you would do is dig with the ladder, because we're in a digging mindset, and that's a problem-solving mindset. So even if you had the answer in that moment, if you only know how to dig, it's just going to make your hole deeper, and you're not going to get out of the hole. And the first step is to stop digging. And our mind's not going to like that. It's going to reject a lot of this. And so how I end that first module is say, I don't really want you to do anything different this week. I don't want you to try to find another shovel to dig out of this hole. What I want you to do is observe. Notice how many times your mind is recommending you try to control your urges to view pornography, or that you need to find another shovel to get out of this hole as quickly as you can. I just want you to observe how much your mind is working to figure out this problem. And just notice that. And my hope is to cultivate just more awareness of how this mind is working and how active it really is. But I'm not going to drop down a ladder into this hole, because right now our mind only knows how to dig. It's just not going to work.
There's a question in my thought right here, but I'm going to try and figure out how to articulate it, because just like you said, we're in that digging mindset. And so I think when you make that list of shovels and gotta say, I'm sure everyone has a very impressive list. Like if there were awards for like deepest, like most impressive hole dug, like we'd all be competing. I mean, on it was so sorry, there's so many thoughts on that list. And I'm going through it. I just went through it again and I actually made a new one without looking at my old one.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see and think about now that on both of those lists, there are very few things that are even remotely relevant to slowing down, being mindful. It's like go, go, go. It's like, I'm going to white knuckle this. I'm going to like go run a marathon. I'm going to like everything that you can possibly do to just completely work your way out of this. Nothing about breathing. Nothing about, I mean, there's like singing a hymn, but that's like you're doing something else. It's another shovel, right? Like it's so interesting. But I think once you have this list in front of you and you go about that next week doing everything the same, you're like, holy cow, my life is full of shovels.
Yeah.
And I think some of those things, like it gets a little dangerous because like prayer or like religious actions, I guess, that you've previously used as shovels don't need to carry that same connotation. And you can still do them in a mindful way without having them be a shovel. But other things, like I'm literally just making myself busy so I won't have an urge. It's like, no, like don't do that. You're just going to wipe yourself out. Like,
Yeah.
It was so fascinating to look at that week and say, holy cow, I've been doing all these things and they literally compose my day, but now you're aware of them and it's bringing attention to it and you're realizing this. And again, it's just humbling to see all of it.
Wow.
And it's, if you're going to take pride in anything, take pride in how hard you've worked. I mean, to come up with all these shovels and you've probably memorized every scripture in the dang Bible by now. If you're working on it, like it's honestly impressive in the people I've talked to, how hard they've worked.
Yep.
But how hard you don't need to work to fix it.
Yep. I love that insight. I've never really connected with that all of those attempts to get out of the hole are not the slowing down, be more aware, learn, understand. They're scramble out as fast as you possibly can. And I think that's probably why they're doomed to fail. They're not really equipped for the actual underlying concern, which is I'm feeling stuff that's uncomfortable and I need to get more comfortable with that. All these shovels are like, yep, get away from that as fast as you can. It's hot. Let's get out of here. And those are just not going to help you develop that capacity that you need. And so when I learned from these ACT pros that have been doing this a lot longer than me, they even call this idea a deep dive, that if we can get people into these emotions and feel the actual pain and discomfort, I mean, it's almost like plunging into the ocean. And the deeper you can get into those, it almost catapults you back up to the surface. And that deep dive into emotions is necessary to motivate change. But what happens is often we're like, no, that water's too deep. It's too dark. It's too scary. I'm just going to flop around on the surface, and you don't really get anywhere. So you exert a ton of energy and you don't get anywhere. Where a deep dive is straight down into them, requires very little effort, just jumping in. And then it naturally shoots you right out in a direction that's quite meaningful. And emotions have that ability to catapult you into your life and drive your actions in a really meaningful way. But if we're doing everything we can to avoid any possible emotion, that's why we're not really seeing the change that we want and often not having that fulfilling of a life, because we're avoiding emotion. It is that key. And so I do kind of want people to enter that pit and be like, wow, it's really quite dark and painful and sucky down here. And it's like, yeah, that's actually going to catapult you up to a different outcome. But if like, I don't want to go down there, it's like probably not going to get a lot of movement then.
I agree. And if the program didn't have you do that, it would just be another shovel.
Another shovel.
Because you're avoiding the real concern. And that's just emotions.
Yep. And I think honestly, that's maybe my one fear, because I'm not interacting with people through the program. Like in counseling, I can make sure that we're opening up that emotion in the counseling room and reflecting on that. But in the program, it's like you're going at it on your own, and like the mindfulness activities are there, but it's really easy just to say, oh, I'm going to skip that. And then there's a couple 100-page workbook that encourages you to reflect on these ideas and concepts and reflect on your mindfulness throughout the week. And I can see people skipping that and then going through all 10 modules and say, yep, I learned every single concept and my behavior hasn't changed at all. And they're like, okay, ACT didn't work either. Got to move on to something else. And that would be my fear, that you could read these concepts all day, but that's not going to really change behavior unless you actually engage in them differently. And so I just can't tell people, well, this is what your problem is, now do it different. You actually have to experience mindfulness and experience emotions and reflect on these throughout the week. And if we don't, yeah, they're just empty ideas. And they're as good as anybody else's empty ideas. It's like we actually have to engage in those practices.
It's exactly like your diving metaphor. You can swim the surface of anything and have it be completely meaningless and exhausting, frankly. But when you dive in, it's when you get something out of it. And I think that is the cool part, especially as you're talking about those, like the workbook questions. With module 1 specifically, it's after the Youre In A Hole video, where it asks you, like, what were your reactions? Like, how did you notice yourself feeling as you heard that story? And I think that's a scary one to answer. And you have to kind of make that personal decision of like, yeah, you know what? Like, I do feel bad and alone and dark, and I'm in a hole.
Yep.
And it's deep. And though I can see, I have felt and do feel that that's like a scary thing to articulate, even if it's just on paper. Like, your mind doesn't really want to admit that because it's solving problems, right? But that, I think those questions, yeah, if you really answer them with your feelings, can be very powerful. And then reflecting on that as you're looking at shovels, again, it's just, it's humbling.
It is. And hearing you talk for me is evidence that you took the dive. You didn't watch a YouTube video on diving and the ocean and be like, wow, that was scary. You dove in. And I think that's the key. Is I don't want people to watch a YouTube video of me talking about ACT. What I'm doing is I'm inviting them to dive in. And I'll dive in there with them. And I dove in over and over, and I'll keep doing that. That is mental health, and that is counseling. And you did it. You dove in. And one thing I love about ACT is your mind is going to disagree with it at times, and that's okay. You actually don't need to believe any of the garbage that's coming out of my mouth. It can be just words. You can agree with it. You can disagree with it. You can believe it or disbelieve it. What I'm inviting people to do is to actually try it out in their life, to actually dive in, to actually take a bite. But often our mind decides before we even jump in the water, like, oh, it's too cold, or I don't like that food. And it's like, no, what I'm asking people to do is actually try it out for themselves to see what isn't working in their life. But you don't have to believe me. And I love that, where you don't have to agree with me. I'm not trying to sell you on these concepts. It doesn't really matter. For me, I'm really trying to encourage people to jump in and learn for themselves what's really going to work. And in the end, learning from your experience is going to be way more important than on believing if some stuff I said is true or not. I want you to learn from your own experience And we do that through mindfulness.
Yeah. I feel like there's a quote like principles applied are always more effective than principles understood, or something like that. Like it's, and that, I mean, that resonates. That just kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You never learn anything by just watching or reading. You have to go and do it. And I just remembered my earlier question. Sorry, right turn. But in context of those shovels, how do you figure out what you're doing? And I'm kind of answering my own question right now. How do you figure out what you're doing is a shovel and not just like a hobby or a religious practice or eating food? I don't know, like just a normal activity that you would participate in regardless of if you had this struggle or not.
Yep. And the one word that bubbles up to the surface is control. If you're engaging in that activity in an effort to control an urge, a thought, or an emotion, it's a shovel. If you're engaging in that activity because it's fulfilling and meaningful and connecting and has a purpose, that's a value. That's something I would encourage you to pursue. And like the same thing could either be a value or a shovel. It's all about the purpose. So I think about like we're both religious individuals and probably both engage in prayer. If we're praying to control an urge, it's a shovel. If we're praying to cultivate our relationship with God, it's a deep, meaningful value. So for me, prayer isn't good or bad. It's a tool. And what kind of a reason are you using that tool? For me, it's a really effective tool to cultivate a relationship with God. It's a pretty ineffective tool to control an emotion or an urge. It's not that prayer's good or bad. It's a tool. What you're using it for. And that intention matters.
That's the word that I intent, right? Like, and I think that's where mindfulness comes in too, because we were talking a little bit before, like any activity with mindful intention can be a very fulfilling experience, right? And that's what we're learning with ACT, is that as you are deciding what your values are and then mindfully pursuing those, the shovels are naturally just kind of you're gonna drop them.
Yeah.
Which is very nice.
Yeah. I'm hesitant to say this, but maybe I'll push this a little bit further, because I think our mind gets stuck and it gets pretty rigid about what's good or bad or right or wrong. But we often think about, oh, going to church is good. And I would say I've probably gone to church for the wrong reasons sometimes, where it's like you should or you're supposed to, what will people think if I'm not there? And with that intention, I probably didn't get much out of church, or maybe I took a step back, honestly. But if I'm there where it's like, I'm here to worship, and I'm here because this is meaningful to me, and I want to feel the Spirit, and I want to worship with people in my faith community, that's probably going to be a pretty meaningful purpose. And so sometimes church probably isn't that helpful, with the wrong mindset, but could be really meaningful with the right mindset. And I think about the same thing with sexual images, where viewing those in an effort to numb out from emotions or escape from discomfort or conflict is probably not going to be that helpful or meaningful or beneficial in your life. And yet there might be other times where people are looking at sexual images and they might take a moment to connect with their body or their sexuality, or recognize that there's beauty in the world, and beauty in bodies and intimacy. For me, film is not the best way to maybe capture that, but there might be a moment where you savor that. We're like, wow, there is some goodness in the world, and it feels good to feel this connection, this arousal. And that could be motivating to pursue relationships or enhance the relationships in your life. And so for me, pornography is like church. They're tools. They're not necessarily good or bad. It's what is the intention? What is the purpose? And I've learned from a lot of folks that say, sometimes looking at sexual images is facilitated sexual arousal and intimacy with a partner. And it's helped me learn some new things and feel more okay with my sexuality. And that seems to be pretty meaningful experiences for some. For others, they're using pornography as a tool to escape emotion and control urges. And I'm like, that's probably not a very effective way to look at sexual images. And so I know that might be, our minds might be like, no, porn's always bad and church is always good. And I take more of a contextual approach, and that's ACT. It's a contextual behavioral science where we're letting go of these judgments and these categories of good or bad. And instead, we're interested more in the function. Like, what is it that you're doing this for? And is it actually helping you accomplish it or not? And sometimes going to church is not improving your relationship with God. And sometimes viewing pornography is not destroying your relationships. Like, we need to understand the context. And I know there might be some minds being like, no, that's not true. And like, the good news is you don't have to believe me. It doesn't really matter. But test it out in your own life and see if that intention is really the key. There's not good or bad, but that intention, how we're using it, can really unlock doors and make church more meaningful and sexuality healthy. But often our premeditated beliefs about these and judgments is what makes going to church or viewing sexual images problematic on both ends. And that's just a different way to think about it from a more of a context perspective.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts on that one too. I mean, you say pornography is church, and that's automatically going to like make people's hair stand up, right? But it's cool because I know that the principles that you just talked about are all like I've applied them, and I know that that's how it works. Like when you do zoom out and use ACT and that context, you can assign values and the things that matter to you. You can say, okay, church is definitely a value for me, and I hold that close, and I want to mindfully attend and be active in church. But pornography, on the other hand, I don't see as a value. I see it as a tool, but I don't want to use that because there's dissonance with my value. It gives you control on a step back from where you are before ACT, where you haven't even defined your values or what you're using as a tool. And you've got all these shovels, and things that are values have been shovels, things that are shovels you think are values. But stepping back, and now you've assigned very specific roles, and you can mindfully approach each one of them. Like that's liberating.
Yeah.
And if you think that sounds exhausting because it's like a lot of work and very big bunny ears on that, try digging holes for a decade or 20 or 40 years. Like that's a hard argument to win.
Yeah. I love that language you use. And I got this visual when you said step back. It's like when you step back and can look at what your values are and have intention, that's actually sitting in the driver's seat. And you can now steer this car where you really want to go. But that other position where we're just throwing everything we can to get rid of a porn issue is like driving from the front bumper. And you're just hitting garbage cans and everything in front of you. And you really can't steer the car. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is so painful. And it's so much work. But from that right perspective, sitting in the vehicle from the driver's seat, you can take yourself places. And that really is key. And it is an easier way. But it is being able to take that step back and get out of those ruts about what our mind is telling us is right or wrong and in the right direction.
Absolutely. And it's all just uphill from there. Not sure. That might have sounded negative. Uphill in a good way from there.
Like,
yeah.
uphill is like, there's better things ahead. I was thinking, now the real work.
Yes. Sorry, no. That was poor wording on my part.
No, I love that. Well, this was fun. I hope this was meaningful for folks to get a little bit of a preview about what's in this first module of the Life After Pornography program. And we'll keep walking through the other modules as well. So I hope it's meaningful for those that are going through it and those that are maybe considering going through the program, but also recognize this is not a substitute. This is not, well, I can watch it, I'm good to go. It's, you still have to engage in this yourself. But I think it is helpful to start to cultivate that mindset and begin to prepare our minds for another way.
And I know everyone's going to be in a different spot. But I find so much value in these conversations that I have about these principles. And I think there is certainly a level of vulnerability that you need to have to talk to other people about these struggles. But I think there's a way that you could approach a friend without even talking about your struggle necessarily, but talk about, hey, like there's a lot of things I value, and there's a lot of things I just kind of use as tools to like cope with how stressful school is. Like, what do you use to cope? Like, what are your shovels? Yeah. And I think in those conversations, you'll come to some cool realizations and have some cool questions. And I think there's just so much dialogue that can happen and be beneficial around all this, and it can lead to connection. And I've seen that, and that's a huge part of the program for me too. I think once there's a lot of people in these trenches with you.
Yeah.
And I think it's powerful to connect. And I've just seen a lot of cool miracles and relationships strengthened and come from those conversations and those connections.
And those are really sweet, precious moments, I think, to step back from this struggle that's so exhausting and this hole that's 7 miles deep, and to recognize that we are not alone. And I think about all of that time and energy that's been devoted to digging this bottomless pit. And if we could reorient all that time and energy to our values, to our relationships, to our pursuits, the things that are really meaningful. I mean, think about the things you could accomplish in this life. So much energy has gone to overcoming this pornography problem. And all of that could be directed towards cultivating better relationships, cultivating spirituality, physical fitness, serving other people, having really meaningful family and friendships. And I think that's the key. And like you said, talking about people about, hey, this is my struggle, this is how I cope. How do you do it? That for me changes a shovel into a value where now you're focusing on connections. And that is meaningful. And that's fuel to take you really far in the direction you want to go. And that's my hope. Instead of perpetually digging this bottomless pit, let's take that momentum forward in your life into a life after this pornography struggle. And for me, all that energy, if we could just transfer it to things that really matter. Like, think about all this energy we focus on trying to not do something. What if we focus all our energy on trying to do something? I mean, that would be a game changer. And that's really Life After Pornography, is trying to help people make that shift from, let's stop wasting time and energy and resources on not doing something and put that all towards creating a life that's worth living.
I love that. And to think of all the time and effort put in to how deep I've dug this struggle, and how excited I am to see the time and effort that I can put into building myself up.
Yeah. It's going to be a beautiful thing. I mean, you're going to build amazing structures and buildings. that people will visit for generations. A bottomless pit, people can't really visit. Like there's nothing to do in there. But a structure that's built on your values and relationships can leave an enduring legacy. And module 1 is the start. It's the first step.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
Oh,
Module
I can't
2's
wait.
up next.
I can't wait to walk through module 2. Like each of these are like, oh, but this one, oh my goodness, wait till you get for this one. And each of those, I still kind of nerd out about all of these, even though I've been doing this for a long time. It's like, these really have the potential to make a meaningful impact in people's lives. So I can't wait to walk through module 2.
Building a lot of structures.
Yep. Okay, Brian, take care.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to rate and subscribe. I know you might be facing some issues in your life or know someone who is. Issues like anxiety, challenges in dealing with emotions, or other compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography. And I know it's tough to talk to people about problems. Difficult to stare those obstacles down that we face in life and to really know how to deal with them. It's hard to know what to say and when to say it. And then when that moment you finally reach out to family and friends happens, sometimes it falls flat. I haven't found many programs teaching effective strategies like mindfulness, how to improve relationships, and ways to address unwanted pornography viewing through research-supported principles. So whether you simply want to help with a problem like unwanted pornography, difficulty responding to emotions, or just want to understand the world of someone struggling with porn a little better, head over to LifeAfterPornography.com and get in on the next training. There you'll learn the exact same strategies individuals addicted to pornography used to transform their lives by implementing principles from evidence-based treatment shown effective in research for reducing unwanted pornography viewing. You'll learn the secrets, the myths, the enemies to recovery, and the LAP framework for dealing with unwanted porn viewing that we call WAVE. If that's something that interests you, click the link in the description or just head over to lifeafterpornography.com. I'm Dr. Cameron Staley. See you on the inside.